In this series, we'll dive deep into a powerful journey of transformation, how one man learned to never get angry or bothered by anyone, by embracing the ancient wisdom of Stoicism. Each episode reveals a new lesson, a new challenge, and a new step toward true freedom from emotional turmoil. Let us begin. It was supposed to be just another Monday routine, forgettable. The office buzzed with the low hum of keyboards and artificial politeness. He sat at his desk, jaw tight, eyes glazed over as unread emails piled up in the corner of his screen. The coffee was weak. The air conditioner buzzed louder than usual. Still, he said nothing. Then it happened. A co-worker, smirking, always too casual, dropped a line meant to be funny, but sharp enough to cut. Someone's in a mood today. Rough weekend crying about that presentation. The words weren't even that cruel. But something inside him cracked. He stood. Not slowly. Not thoughtfully. It was sudden, violent, even. Papers rustled. A mug clattered to the floor. And before he knew what he was saying, the words were flying from his mouth, raw and too loud. You think this is funny, you think you're clever, maybe if you did half as much work as you run your mouth, this place wouldn't be such a damn mess. The room froze. Heads turned. A pin could be dropped and shattered the silence. The smirking co-worker paled, eyes wide, but said nothing. An hour later, he was in HR. 30 minutes after that, he was holding a box of his things. The elevator ride down felt like a free fall. Every second played on repeat in his mind, the heat in his chest, the look on their faces, the feeling of something primal taking over. He didn't remember choosing to yell. He barely remembered standing up. And that's what terrified him. Alone in his apartment that night, surrounded by the familiar clutter of a life in pause, he stared at the ceiling and whispered to the dark, why do I lose myself like that? Why do I give people so much power over me? He didn't have the answer. Not yet. But something told him this was the beginning of a reckoning. The city moved on without him. Trains screeched, horns blared, and strangers rushed by with purpose. But he drifted numb, unmoored. He hadn't shaved in days. His inbox remained unopened. The silence of being unneeded rang louder than the office chatter he once resented. One gray afternoon, with nothing else to do and nowhere else to be, he wandered into a quiet corner of the city, a forgotten block where old record stores and antique shops clung to life like relics from a slower time. That's where he found it. A small bookstore with dust in the windows and a cracked bell over the door. He didn't go in looking for answers. Just somewhere to hide from the noise. The scent of yellowed paper hit him first, aged, earthy, almost sacred. The shelves leaned like tired shoulders. Fiction. History. Spirituality. He ran his fingers across the spines like one might drag a hand along a brick wall in the rain, searching for something to hold onto. Then he saw it. A small, worn book wedged awkwardly between two modern self-help bestsellers. Its title, in faded gold lettering, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He almost scoffed aloud. An emperor's journal, Stoic philosophy. It sounded cold. Detached. Robotic. He flipped through the first few pages out of idle curiosity, half expecting the usual moral cliches. But then his eyes locked onto a single line, one he'd later describe as a collision with his own reflection: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He read it again. Slower. Something shifted. It wasn't motivational fluff. It was blunt, steady, ancient, yet undeniably personal. In that moment, Something fragile inside him stirred. A question began forming, not in words, but in a quiet tremor deep in his chest. What if the chaos wasn't out there? What if it was in here? He bought the book for $5. The cashier didn't even look up. Later that night, long after the city had quieted, he sat cross-legged on the floor of his apartment, reading by the yellow light of a desk lamp. The silence didn't scare him this time. It welcomed him. Page after page, Marcus whispered from centuries past, not about gods or rituals, but about discipline, acceptance, and choice. And slowly, page by page, a new kind of power began to flicker in him, not the kind that controls others, but the kind that reclaims yourself. He didn't know it yet, but this forgotten book, almost ignored, was about to become his guide into a life he never thought possible. Change didn't come like a thunderclap. It came like a whisper, barely audible, easily ignored. But he heard it. The first experiment was small. At a crowded cafe, someone cut him in line. Normally, he'd sigh loudly or mutter something under his breath. But this time, he did nothing. He simply observed the moment. His hands clenched out of habit, but he didn't speak. The barista called his name, and life moved on. It left him shaken, not because he felt weak, but because he felt free. He began testing himself like a scientist. Every time he felt the heat rising in his chest, someone interrupting him, ignoring him, talking down to him, he paused. He imagined himself behind a glass wall, watching it all play out. And what he saw disturbed him. He saw a man addicted to control. Addicted to approval. A man who reacted to every slight like it was an attack on his worth. His face, in these moments, didn't show power, it showed panic, insecurity, ego. Like a puppet on strings pulled by strangers who didn't even know his name. At night, he journaled. Not the curated version of events, but the raw truth. Today I felt rage when a colleague interrupted me. But did I lose anything real, or just my illusion of importance? The more he wrote, the more he saw it. The enemy wasn't the world, it was his interpretation of it. He began revisiting lines from Meditations. One echoed in his mind like a mantra: it is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them. He realized that anger had always been his armor. It made him feel tall when he felt small. But now he was seeing it clearly for the first time as a reaction born of fear, not strength. One evening, he sat in front of his bathroom mirror. Not to fix his hair or his collar, but to look. Really look. What stared back wasn't a calm man yet. But it was an honest one. One who was no longer owned by every careless glance, tone, or insult. One who had begun to unlearn the story that he must always defend himself to be worthy. This mirror, once used to check appearances, had become something else entirely, a place to watch himself become free. By now, mornings had changed. No more waking up late, scrolling through missed notifications, or rushing out the door fueled by caffeine and resentment. Now, each day began with silence. A notebook. And a question that would once sounded pessimistic, even paranoid: what could go wrong today? He discovered the practice in a commentary on Stoic thought, Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. The idea wasn't to attract misfortune, but to disarm it. To walk toward it in the mind, so when it came, it didn't take you by surprise. So he played the game. He imagined being cut off in traffic. Being insulted at a meeting. Being ignored, dismissed, humiliated. He didn't resist the scenes. He let them play out fully in his imagination, until they lost their sting. Then he asked, And if that happens, what will I do? At first, it felt mechanical, even dark. But the results were undeniable. When someone actually snapped at him in real life, it was like déjà vu. The scene had already played out earlier that morning in his mind, and he had already chosen peace. And peace showed up. He started using sticky notes on the fridge with questions like, who might disappoint me today? What will I do when I'm ignored? Can I let it pass through me without leaving a mark? It was like rehearsing for battle, but not to fight to not fight. People noticed something was different. Not in what he said, but in what he didn't. He wasn't flinching anymore. Not baited by passive-aggressive jokes or subtle jabs. They lost their power, like rubber arrows bouncing off stone. And yet, beneath the stillness, he began to feel a strange tension. Like something was gathering in the background. A pressure in the air before a storm. Then one day, as he returned from the grocery store, arms full of lemons and leafy greens, he saw a familiar figure waiting at the corner of his building. Same hair. Same posture. Same smirk curling just slightly before the lips parted to speak. Her. The one who knew how to trigger him without saying a word. He froze for just a moment, not out of fear but calculation. He felt something ancient stir in his chest. Would the practice hold, because now, the real test had arrived. She stood there like a ghost from a life he thought he'd left behind, effortlessly confident, eyes sharp as a blade, and that same familiar smirk that had once ignited a wildfire in his gut. Hey, she said, voice dripping with casual cruelty, the kind that hides poison beneath sweetness. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the way they landed, precise and deliberate, like darts aimed at his chest. I heard about what happened. Tough break. He swallowed hard. The calm he had been cultivating wavered. His breath hitched, but he forced himself to remain still, rooted in the moment like a tree weathering a storm. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. Funny, isn't it how things come full circle? Guess who got hired at the same company? The words hit him like a cold wave. The place that had been his battlefield, the place where he had lost more than just a job, was now hers. For a heartbeat, anger surged hot, sharp, unbearable. The old him would have shouted, confronted, stormed away in fury. But he didn't. Instead, he felt a curious split inside. Part of him wanted to lash out. Part of him felt a strange, foreign stillness, a silence deeper than any he had known. He looked her in the eyes, searching for a crack in the armor. For a moment, she seemed unsettled, no longer in full control. What do you want? He asked, voice calm but heavy. She shrugged, a glimmer of something vulnerable flickering before she masked it again. Just thought you should know. Maybe it's time to bury the past. Or maybe it's time to see who really grew. His mind raced. The Stoic lessons whispered at the edges, expect disruption. Expect betrayal. Expect pain. But also, you control your mind. Could he hold on to that? Could he really stand unmoved as the person who had once been his greatest emotional landmine stood inches away? He swallowed the lump in his throat. I'm not the same person you knew, he said quietly. Maybe it was true. Maybe he wasn't. But deep down, he wondered if the calm was stronger than the storm or just the quiet before it. Outwardly, he was the picture of calm, measured words, steady gaze, an unshakable stillness that drew admiring glances from co-workers and strangers alike. They whispered about his newfound zen-like demeanor, marveling at how he no longer flinched at slights or provocations. But beneath the surface, a storm raged, a silent war no one could see. Each night, When the world slipped away and the apartment grew dark, the quiet pressed in. It wasn't peace he felt then. It was a hollow echo, a suppression of something wild and raw. He found himself replaying moments long buried, the harsh words of his father, the silent disappointment in his mother's eyes, the endless chase for approval that had fueled his rage. Anger, he realized, had always been more than reaction, it was armor forged in childhood wounds. One evening, while scrolling through his phone in a restless haze, he stumbled upon a lecture by Epictetus. The words hit like a lightning bolt: "Don't pretend to be calm. Become calm." The distinction pierced him. Was he truly calm or just wearing a mask? The question clawed at him. He sought answers in Epictetus's writings, discovering a philosophy that demanded more than surface tranquility. It called for transformation, deep, sometimes painful change of the soul. That night, unable to sleep, he retrieved an old photo from his drawer. It was him at 20, eyes bright but haunted, standing next to his mother. Her smile was warm, but her gaze held a quiet sadness he'd never understood. Tears welled as he whispered into the darkness, "I thought I had left this behind. But some ghosts don't vanish, they linger, waiting for the moment you lower your guard." And now, the moment had come. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. No shouting matches or slammed doors. Instead, it came as a quiet confession, a moment that cut deeper than any betrayal shouted in anger. His best friend, the one he trusted above all, sat across from him in a dimly lit cafe. The air hung thick with unspoken words until finally, the friend's voice broke the silence. "I need to tell you something," he said, eyes heavy with guilt. "I was the one who told the boss about your outburst. I thought it might wake you up. Maybe make you see what you were becoming." The words landed like a cold fist to his chest. For a moment, everything around him blurred: the clatter of cups, murmurs from nearby tables, the flicker of neon outside the window. Betrayal wasn't new to him, but this was different. Not malice. Not jealousy. A brutal act masked as concern. He stared at his friend, searching for the man he thought he knew. "How could you?" he whispered, voice cracking. "I did what I thought was best," the friend replied, voice barely steady. "You were destroying yourself. And maybe everyone around you." Fury bubbled just beneath the surface. He wanted to scream, to curse, to tear down the fragile walls he'd built. But something held him back, a question forming slowly, like a seed in barren soil: who really has the power here? Was it the friend, who manipulated events behind the scenes, or was it him, for the rage that had lost him everything? For the first time, he saw his anger not as a weapon, but a chain, one he'd wrapped around his own wrists. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, recalling the lessons etched into his mind: it's not what happens to you, but how you react that matters. His fists unclenched. The cafe around him grew quieter, the betrayal shrinking into a small, manageable stone. Power, he realized, wasn't about control over others. It was mastery over self. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: this blueprint of betrayal was also a blueprint for freedom if only he chose to follow it. The walls closed in slowly, suffocatingly. He had spent weeks walking the razor's edge between calm and chaos, but now the balance shattered. In the solitude of his dim apartment, shadows stretched long across the floor like silent witnesses to his unraveling. The Stoic practices that once offered a lifeline now felt like distant echoes, drowned out by the relentless roar of old wounds reopening. His hands trembled as he reached for the worn copy of Meditations. The words blurred. The discipline he once clung to seemed to mock him now, a cruel reminder of his fragility. Anger clawed its way back wild, feral, demanding release. But release felt like defeat. He felt himself fracturing between the man he was becoming and the man he feared he always was. A bitter laugh escaped his lips as a quote echoed through his mind, stark and undeniable, "The obstacle is the way." He whispered it, almost reverently. Maybe the loss of his job, the betrayals, the relentless self-scrutiny, maybe they weren't punishments or failures. Maybe they were the very path he had to walk. But walking it required a choice. To surrender to despair, to give in to the familiar chaos that promised momentary relief. Or to step forward, into the unknown, with nothing but a flicker of hope and a fragile resolve. The room was silent, save for his ragged breathing. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down like a storm about to break. And then, in that suspended moment between collapse and clarity, he chose. He didn't confront. He didn't seek forgiveness. He didn't even reach for the words to explain. Instead, he embraced a silence so deep it seemed to stretch beyond time itself. The chaos outside, the biting remarks, the whispered judgments, the lingering shadows of betrayal continued their dance. But inside him, something had shifted. He sat in his apartment, the soft glow of the evening sun spilling over worn pages of his journal. His hands rested loosely in his lap, unburdened by the need to react, defend, or prove. When the past, the one embodied by her, threw one last verbal grenade, he didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. She looked at him, eyes narrowing with confusion and a flicker of frustration. "Don't you care?" she asked, voice laced with disbelief. He met her gaze with calm so absolute it was almost disarming. "Not in the way I used to," he replied softly. That simple admission held a universe of meaning. He was no longer a prisoner of his own emotions or the expectations of others. The storm could rage, but the eye remained serene. In this radical peace, he found freedom, a freedom born not of ignorance or denial, but of profound acceptance. He was no longer fighting the world or himself. He was simply being. And in that being, he discovered a strength far deeper than anger or pain. The offer came quietly, like a shadow slipping through the door, a surprising chance to return to the place that had once been his battleground. This time, with a promotion. A chance to reclaim status, stability, and the life he'd lost. The world outside buzzed with expectation, urging him to say yes. To return to the familiar dance of power and conflict. To prove himself once more. But inside, a different voice spoke, calm, unwavering. He stood at the crossroads, the weight of the past pressing against the promise of the future. Could he walk back into the same arena, the same battles, the same traps disguised as opportunities? The answer surprised even him. He shook his head. Not out of bitterness. Not out of defeat. But out of freedom. Freedom from the endless war against others, against circumstance, and most of all, against himself. He packed his things one last time, not with rage or regret, but with quiet resolve. As he stepped out into the bright morning light, his voice-over echoed softly, carrying the wisdom he'd forged through fire. True strength is not in dominance, but in detachment. He walked away not from a job, but from the chains that once bound his mind. The war was over. And for the first time, he was truly free.